Welcome, everybody. It's really wonderful to be with all of you. Those of you who are here in person, and those of you who are on Zoom. We have a big group on Zoom. Soon you'll be able to see who's on Zoom on the TV. And I believe we are recording this, right, Rapti Ferret? We are also recording it, so then, you can watch it again and again and again, as many times as you want. And we can send it to other people. And I'm so excited. It's very excited. I'm very excited to be here and to be able to celebrate together the new book that Natan Margalit, Rabbi Natan Margalit, wrote. And it's just an honor to have you here today, to have you here every Shabbat. To join you in your spiritual journey and learning, and know that TBZ has been so meaningful part of this. And together with Natan, to have Mark Burnett, who's also part of our community and has been in this journey with Natan for a long time in this conversation. Together with them, we also have Joel Siegel, who is a new member of TBZ. He's been a long, old friend of TBZ, but finally he and Laura joined TBZ 2 months ago after I put a lot of pressure on him. So it's very, very exciting that he'll be bringing a little bit of music to this evening. And of course having Ilana, who of course she makes sure that we are also nurtured in the body and not only in the soul, because they come connected. So always thank you. So I'll do a little more formal introduction, which is kind of interesting because I don't think I've ever introduced the two of you this formally, but I'm excited to do this. So Natan Margalit is a rabbi and scholar with 30 years of experience in teaching, writing, organizing, and congregational leadership. He holds a PhD in Near Eastern Studies from UC Berkeley with focus areas in Talmud, literary theory, and anthropology. He has taught at Bard College, the Reconstructionist Rabbinical School, the Rabbinical School of Hebrew College, and now is chair of the Rabbinic Text Department at the Aleph Ordination Program. He's also the director of the Earth-Based Judaism track of the Aleph Ordination Program and is the founder of the nonprofit Organic Torah. He lives in Newton with his wife Ilana and their children Nadav and Aiden, and has been a member of TBZ for about 18 years. And Mark, as co-chair of Polyhog Energy and Climate Group, Mark Burnett has an extensive business law practice focused on the energy and climate technology sectors. Mark advises clients developing innovative technologies and business approach focused on solving energy and sustainability challenges, and counsels emerging and high-growth companies in all aspects of strategic development, financing, acquisitions, and industry-specific regulatory matters. Mark also leads the firm's clean energy and infrastructure project development and finance practice with a particular focus on solar projects development and finance, working with a broad range of developers, project sponsors, and investors. Mark received a BA from Yale University in History and Environmental Studies and a JD from Yale Law School. Mark has been a member of TBZ for 14 years together with his wife, Catherine, and children, Gabriel, Amira, and Hannah Bina. So it's really wonderful to welcome both of you. And because we say solar panels, I have to say that Mark was really one of the people that worked really hard with a group of other TBZ members to make sure that TBZ had solar panels, and we are very proud of that. And now about the book that you can see there, woven with stories of Natan's journey from a secular upbringing in Honolulu to Orthodox Judaism in Jerusalem and back to his own spiritual path. The Pearl and the Flame brings a new integration of ecological thinking and core Jewish concepts. This new integration puts Judaism at the forefront of our struggles against current crises such as climate change, the culture of addiction, and social fragmentation, the urgency for action, and traditional Jewish concepts. Thank you. It's good to have you guys here, everybody. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Rav Claudia. So before we jump into our talk, I have invited Joel Siegel to play some music to get us into a little bit more of like sinking in our whole body and our whole emotions and our spirit, not just head talk. So in order to facilitate that, I invited Joel to play a couple of songs.
Hi. So yeah, I'm taking requests this evening, but only from Natan. So he asked me to play a tune that you play a lot at TBZ, Ve'asu li migdash, ve'shachanti betocham. Let them make me a sanctuary, and I will dwell within them. So if you know it, sing along. The other song that Natan asked me to sing is words I found in the Sfat Emet. I don't actually have it with me, so I hastily scribbled them down. The words are, Bechol Yom Yesh Shir Acher. Every day has a different song. Ki hahitchadshut sheyesh bechol yom noten hashira. The renewal of every day gives every day its song. Uvechol yom yesh ha'ara acheret. Every day has a different illumination. Ve'en kol yom domeh lechavero mivriat ha'olam. And no day is like its fellow. No day is like any other since the creation of the world. Ve'shabbat hi bechinat shir hashirim. Shabbat is like the aspect of the Song of Songs. Shekolel kol hashirim shel yemei ha'maaseh. That includes all of the songs since creation. I was actually thinking of Natan when I wrote this because it's a tribute to the Hawaiian guitarists. So I'll try it. בכל יום יש שיר אחר, כי ההתחדשות שיש בכל יום נותן השירה. בכל יום יש שיר אחר, כי ההתחדשות שיש בכל יום נותן השירה. ובכל יום יש הערה אחרת, ואין כל יום דומה לחברו בבריאת העולם. בכל יום יש שיר אחר, כי ההתחדשות שיש בכל יום נותן השירה. ובכל יום יש הערה אחרת, ואין כל יום דומה לחברו מבריאת העולם. ובכל יום יש הערה אחרת, ואין כל יום דומה לחברו בבריאת העולם. ושבת היא בחינת שיר השירים, שכולל כל השירים, שכולל כל השירים של ימי המעשה, של ימי המעשה, של ימי המעשה. ואין כל יום דומה לחברו בבריאת העולם. ואין כל יום דומה לחברו בבריאת העולם.
תודה, thank you. Thank you, Joel. That's, it actually just brings me to another level of integration. The book is a lot about integration, and I don't know if it's ever in the history of the world, the Sfat Emet has been set to slack key Hawaiian guitar music. Should happen. There's a huge audience of neo-Hasidic Hawaiian music fans that are waiting. So anyway, but no, for me personally, it's an amazing integration. I love it. Thank you. So Mark and I are gonna dialogue, and Mark's gonna kind of, I guess, interview on some level. So I'll turn it over to Mark.
Thanks, Natan.
Yeah.
It's an honor to be up here with you, in dialogue with you about this book you've written. We've been friends for a long time. I thought I'd bring my own journey into where this conversation brings to start us off. When I was 16 in suburban Chicago, in my junior year, history teacher believed he was reincarnated from being a Plains Indian and taught us about climate change at a time. This is 1988, when that was not a widely known concept. I remember spending a lot of that summer terrified. It was the hottest summer on record in the world, and it launched my own environmental journey. I was not connected to Judaism at the time, in a deep way. And I remember my environmental journey learning about Alfred Whitehead and these other environmental thinkers who believed that Western religion was actually fundamentally at conflict with environmentalism. And I could have used this book back then, for sure. My journey as it continued to Israel, Pardes, where I met Alana. We became friends. I began to learn about the connections, but still it felt tenuous. It felt like people were exploring how does Jewish thinking and modern environmental thinking coexist. It still felt like a thing you had to work hard. You had to pick out a couple, there are a couple phrases that kept getting used in every single teaching on this, right? Like they'd find the couple things that seemed kind of environmentalist in this Talmud teaching or that teaching, and it was like, it felt like it was just the raw beginnings of what became ultimately, the thinkers who you're friends with, I'm friends with, have taken the Jewish environmental journey and gone deep into it and seen deep roots of connection, and we're still unfolding those roots. And I think it's deepening the Jewish community, and it's deepening the environmental community. It's not just the Jewish community that's wrestling with this, it's the Christian community, it's other religious communities. someone we both know will be at Mount Sinai in the original Mount Sinai, as we think, in next month, where the climate COP27 is happening, organizing people of all faiths on top of a mountain to bring religious voices together on climate. So it's an important moment for this. And I just want to reflect that I found your book deeply meaningful on a number of levels. But the level on which I was most moved by it is this systems thinking that you bring to it. You're a deep scholar of Judaism and of systems thinking. And I think in my world, as you heard from my bio, I work with innovators in technology and deployment of capital and policy. And these are all very important parts of solving the climate challenge. But fundamentally, the climate challenge, the environmental challenge, the sustainable challenge that we're all facing as a species is a spiritual and moral challenge as well. And I don't think we're going to solve it. And I know you don't think we're going to solve it simply by using the same methods that got us where we are, the same mode of thinking that got us where we are. And I think that we need a new framework, and it's not a linear framework. It's a deeply complex systems-based framework. And I just so appreciated the way you brought so much of systems thinking, of different layers, books I'd never even read or heard of, together into this framework with this kind of your own novel take on Jewish tradition and ways to kind of organize the nestedness of different concepts within Judaism with systems thinking. So I just want to begin by honoring that, and by honoring the book you've written and the way you've written it, and the journey the very personal journey you reflect in the book, as well as these conceptual ideas, including how you and Alana met, which somehow I did not know that story. That's an amazing story. If you haven't read the book, that is an incredible story. And also, just even as I'm saying this, I'm thinking of the story I told about where I started with my teacher, my junior year high school history teacher, the mitzvah concept you have of tipping points, and the way that he taught that class that day. Who knows how many people he affected? He certainly affected my life. And so let me lead that into my first question for you, which is, what inspired you to write this book now? I mean, these are ideas you've been percolating for probably your whole adult life. Tell us about the process of how you came to it, and really also when you were writing it, what you hoped people would take away from it.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. That's a lot to take in. So yeah, it does go back. I'm actually goes back all the way, as I talk about in the book, it goes all the way back to my childhood, and things that are just very deep within me and my experience. I talk in the beginning of the book about just my experience growing up in Hawaii, which I'm not complaining. It's a great place to grow up. It's beautiful. But as the son of the sort of transplanted New York Jewish intellectuals, it was not an easy cultural fit. And, there was just that, as I kind of talk about, that mixture of loving the physical and the spiritual world of Hawaii. I talk about these trees in our house. We had this house which was kind of just like we were different. Our house felt very different. We were up next to this hill, not like any of the other houses. We were back in tucked in with all these huge banyan trees. And the banyan trees were really a part of my psyche, my life. They were these huge trees and if you know, a banyan tree has roots that are the vines that will come down and they'll attach to the ground and then they'll connect. And so you get these kind of arcs and cathedrals and things. It's wonderful for playing hide and seek in, which we did all the time. And so, and just the sensuous beauty of Hawaii. I think Hawaii is actually the state that's, it's most easy to be happy in the United States. And it's easy because you could just walk out of the house in your shorts and t-shirt and go to the beach across the street. But so there was that. I'm loving just the nature and feeling drawn to that nature, but also feeling how do I fit in? Who am I? Who are my people? How do I fit in? How do I fit into the people, the kids at school and all, and so that sort of was this backdrop until, until I got to Jewish summer camp. As a teenager, I went to California, Camp Swig, in the old Camp Swig, which was like in Big Basin in the Redwoods. It was beautiful there as well, but it was just like, there was something that was different. I found myself that I fit in, and I felt whole. And there was something about just like, if you know summer camp, like, and this was Debbie Friedman songs with Debbie Friedman there singing it. And we were like under the tree, under the redwoods and singing and arm in arm. And it was an experience that gave me a taste of wholeness and of being really alive in a way that I had never really experienced before. And so that was really the beginning. That was the taste of something that I kind of like pursued and looked for. How can I feel that again? That sense of belonging, of connecting, of being part of something. And so that was part of, where I came from, just personally. But then I started connecting it with the world, because the world is in a place right now, which is, on the one hand, if you just have to like look around and read the newspaper or listen to anything and see that we got these incredible problems that, it's like I don't even have to, the problems. And from climate and environment, but also parallel to that, to society and politics and the economy. I mean, everything seems to be like falling apart. And I think because it is. I think because it's all related and things are fragmenting, and it's not an accident that all of these things are happening, because things are really fragmenting. And at the same time, what you're talking about, there is, and there has been for several decades, little by little, a move to get away from a lot of the thinking that got us into this. There has been, so it's not just Judaism, but Western culture, Western thought has itself started to realize like, we're pulling things apart too much. It's too much individualism. It's too much breaking things down to the smallest unit. And so things like ecological thinking and systems thinking have started to develop in the Western world. And so what I think has been exciting for me, and I've been like, it's been germinating for a long time, is this, it's like, this is an amazing opportunity right now. Like, it's just like, this is a time when we can integrate these ancient Jewish ways of thinking with what the Western world is really coming to. And so we really have an opportunity to not be this kind of like weird thing that doesn't quite fit in, but we actually really can be contributing as a major contribution to the world solving of these problems. We can turn things around, but we're only going to turn things around, as you mentioned, not with just a technological fix. We're only going to turn things around with the things that religions do, which is give us stories and mythologies and a whole different way of looking at who we are as a species in the world.
So say more about that. Tell us about some of the new stories we need that are really old stories that maybe we've forgotten, that you give some great examples in the book. What are some of the ones that really stand out for you?
Well, so, I guess I'll just jump right in, because the book is built on these three parallels between Western systems thought and core thoughts in Judaism. So we all know the words minyan and mitzvah. Maybe not everybody knows mikdash, but mikdash is sanctuary. It's also a very important idea. So those are three core concepts that people know in Judaism. But what I'm doing in the book is I'm connecting those to concepts that are a part of ecological thinking and systems thinking. And so that we can now actually start to see where Judaism is a part of this shift. So
yeah, start with minyan and nestedness.
Yeah, so nestedness. Let me start with nestedness, because that's mikdash.
Oh, right.
So, but
emergence. I have it.
Emergence. Emergence is like.
Start with minyan though, because that's where you start in the book.
Okay, I start in the book with minyan. So minyan is emergence. A minyan is it's not just this arbitrary rule. Okay, you got to have 10 to do these things, but there is a shift when you have 10 Jews together all of a sudden you don't just have individuals, you have community. And when you have community, what we say in Judaism is that there is God's presence. The Shekhinah is present in a different kind of way. What we're really saying with that community, these 10 Jews, is that we're saying now the Jewish people is here. It's an entity that is past, present, and future. It connects us to that entity, which is an entity in the world called the Jewish people. And what we're saying is that, like, we actually now are a representative of, it just reminds me, like, because when I was just back from yeshiva, this is a side, and I was like in my 20s, and I was going back to Hawaii, and another friend of mine from yeshiva was there also. And so we decided we're going to have a minyan on the top of Mount Olamana. Mount Olamana is a difficult peak to hike on Oahu. And so it's like, okay, we're going to have like, so we almost made it. It's really hard. You got to have ropes and everything together, but we almost made it. So having a minyan meant that it means like the Jewish people has now prayed on the top of Mount Olamana. Anyway, but that idea that there is now a whole greater than the sum of its parts. And that to me is so much of what we talk about in the book. It's at the bottom of so many things that are important to our world, because that feeling of wholeness and newness that comes, as you talk about in the song, about like each day is a hitchadshut. Each day there's a newness. So newness comes when you can feel like a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. So like when I teach. Most of my professional work is teaching. And as I talk about a couple stories in the book, I talk about like, there have been times when I've been teaching and I tell a story, like I passed out a few, this was an elderly crowd, so I passed out a few little like quotes of Jewish quotes about like aging and elderly, and people read the quote and they would talk about it, and then I would call on somebody else, another quote, and then it's like we did that for 45 minutes and it flowed, and then after I called it to an end, it was like spontaneous applause, and it was wow. It's like I didn't really even say very much, but what happened was there was a flow between the texts, the people and their ideas, my ideas, all of us together. There was something in between the whole that we created. And so, and new ideas came up. There were ideas there that I would never have thought of. And I know that in any classroom I'm teaching. If I'm droning on, like the other story I tell in the book, if I'm just droning on, trying to download my deep wisdom to somebody else, they're usually just going to fall asleep because it's just one directional. When you have a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts, then new things emerge from your thought and my thought, and what comes out together in the alchemy.
And so taking that idea and transposing it to an environmental idea, one of the interesting things that I really took away from that is the importance of that communal whole. Ironically, when you have societies of 300 million people, it's very hard to have a unit of community that matters. We had a conversation. There's a fundamental idea in environmental thought called the tragedy of the commons, which is this idea that resources that are commonly owned can't be preserved. Think of fisheries, where everyone's trying to get their own fish out and then ultimately there's none left. But that's an idea I learned about when I was studying environmental studies in college 30 years ago. But there's a whole new system of thought coming up that hasn't yet caught on of, well, if you have the right level of organization of community, that community takes care of the resource. And it's really only when you're focused on the individual. So the minyan concept is an analogy for just broader community, but community at a scale that's human and that matters and that where people know each other. Exactly. That feels like an idea we've lost in, we don't have that unit. People say kibbutzim was a unit that worked for social living, even, like you need to know each other. And I feel like you really got at that. So
exactly. Well, so that, I mean, exactly. And it's like what Malcolm Gladwell talks about in that book about tipping points, that, there's the rule of 150. Mm-hmm. And there's, about the size of what used to be a tribe, that's about the size. And there were corporations that talked about, like, they split, and there's synagogues that say, like, we're going to split after 150, families because it works better. And we really, and in terms of like just even thinking about climate change and so many of our issues, because when we lose that, which we've really lost that in our society, like so many, and a lot of that is economic. People, rural people have been driven out of, communities have been broken up for all sorts of reasons, and also just technology. There's just people more on their phones and their screens. And so when we don't have that real sense of community, then people are yearning for something. And what they mostly find when they look out in the world is not something that actually really nourishes that.
Right.
They find leaders that tell them that you can join up with me and it'll make it right again. You know, they find commercial kind of things that buy this product and you'll be happy. And so a lot of the things that and addiction. So I talk a lot about addiction because like addiction comes about when you feel that emptiness. And the addiction to this consumer culture and addiction to all the comforts that we have, if you really dig down, a lot of that addiction comes about because people are not feeling that deep sense of home, satisfaction, belonging,
Right.
that we really all, as human beings, we yearn for that.
Well, shout out to TBZ. I think this is a place that has that
Exactly.
sense of community,
Exactly,
right?
yes.
Many, you know, I feel always very fortunate what we have here. I don't think a lot of people have that in this world we live in. And
Exactly.
so I think that idea, it's a deep idea because I think it is something that we've lost. We've lost that sense of sort of obligation to our neighbor, that sense of interdependence, right?
Right.
We are so independent that we don't need each other in the same way, and that fosters division and
Exactly.
separation, right?
Right, exactly. Like when Noberi talks about it, it's like this is the first couple generations or generation that doesn't need to know their neighbors. And it's not healthy.
Right.
And, you know, it's, I'm blanking on his name, but he wrote a book, a journalist, he wrote a book called Tribes. And just talk about like this kind of weird paradox where people will come back from wars and feel just like they can't fit in anymore because like they had this deep sense of connection to their people in their unit. Or when there's a natural disaster and people will remember that time as like the best time in their life, even though it was a disaster.
Right.
Because people will always talk about like they came together in the community. And so when the lights go out, paradoxically in the modern world, when the lights go out, then all of a sudden you have to go talk to your neighbor. And you have to like go share that candle, the flashlight, and it pulls people together in a way that people actually love. And so we are deeply missing that, and that's one of the real core things that I think we need to address.
All right, so we're going to come back to Minyan and emergence. So now talk to us about Mikdash and nestedness.
Yeah, so thank you. So, you know, so Mikdash is this idea that things are nested. So because, you know, I call it Mikdash, sanctuary, because you have like the Holy of Holies, and then the Holy of Holies in the temple in Jerusalem was inside the holy area, and that was inside the first court, and that was inside the second court, and then the walls, and then the city. And so, and it's just the way any kind of like biological organism works. You have a cell in an organ, and that's in the body, and that's in a community, and so forth. And these units are units in themselves, but they're also connected. They're connected through these permeable membranes. And that means that like you can have a integrity as a unit, but it doesn't mean that you're cut off from the rest. So, you know, I talk about we just have these like either or. And that was another one of the stories. I start out the book with this story, another major sort of like incident in my life or sort of like turning point in my life when I was a 20-year-old and I was traveling in Israel and I got pulled in to yeshiva, to Esha Torah. If anybody remembers, Mayor Schuster was the first of these rabbis who would go along for Esha Torah and pick people up like me on the bus station and take us to the old city, to this yeshiva, where they would try to get, you know, us to come back to Torah true Judaism. And the world is, never mind evolution, the world is 5,700 something years old, and all of this Western stuff, it's all bad, and like we have the right answer. And I was really torn because I was really there in Israel actually looking for this sense of meaning and community, and I was really kind of like very sort of suspicious, but also really sort of drawn towards this. And it really sent me like for a loop. And I left after one day, but as I was leaving, I was just like, what am I doing? Where am I going? What am I going? You know, and it took me months to kind of like start to come out emotionally from this sense of I'm stuck. And it was like, that was an either or. It's like they presented me with either fundamentalist religion or an empty modern world. Or on the other side, or like progressive, tolerant, scientific modern world and fundamentalist, prejudiced, you know, religion. Like, I couldn't figure out, like, which is it? And what I really had to come to is that it doesn't have to be, and Judaism actually doesn't hold by that either or. Judaism has always said, no, we can be a Jewish people and we're nested within humanity. And humanity is nested within the whole world of creation. And it is not a contradiction because it's not an either or. That's the way life works. We're nested. And this is so much an issue today in our country, unfortunately, because that sense of we're all part of one country and we all are, you know, we're all on some level on the same team, but, you know, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, I'm this or that. So we'll have our big arguments, but we come together to acknowledge that there's one goal that we share. That's disappeared, unfortunately, for a lot of people. And when we lose that sense of nestedness, that I can hold this and this at the same time, when we lose that sense of I can be both Jewish and for the world, I can be both a Democrat and for the country, I can be both for America and for the world in terms of climate change, I can hold. It doesn't make an either or. So that is a shift that I think we really need to make. And that's core in Judaism. It's a core concept.
How do you reconcile that with the thing you also write about, though, which is the power of being immersed in something holy? Holy with a W at the beginning, like all of it. And like you described your camp experience, you described your Israel experience, and you talked about the dangers of tapping into something only part, right? And in some ways it being almost worse sometimes when you just kind of, when you're having this halfway experience with something. How do you kind of reconcile those two ideas?
Well, you know, because I think that when you're really happy in a community, it's not like you don't have to put up like these tense obsessive borders around it. You know, it's like, I don't know, maybe this is, I'm not such an expert. Like when I was living in Jerusalem, like, so it was almost like the difference that I felt when I was in Sharei Chesed as opposed to Mea Sharim. I don't know this, you know, there was when I was in Bach, like there are some communities that like you can just feel they're putting up the big barriers because they're feeling like nervous about like we're under siege and so we've got to keep the world out. That's one way of being in community, but there are other communities that are feeling like I'm happy to be in this community and I love being in this community and I'm happy to also have some porousness in my borders. And so I think that's when we have real healthy communities, they don't have to be obsessive and nervous about their borders.
So I'm going to map that, so taking this idea, mapping it onto a modern and environmental kind of concept, just like we did with Minyan. So the notion of place and being connected to place is such a deep idea that a lot of writers have focused on, where when people lose their connection to a particular place, they lose their connection to the earth. Like the earth and nature is not an abstract thing, it's a real thing, and it's for most of our existence as a species, we had deep connections to a place. Even wandering tribes had certain places they went through, right? So in a sense, Mikdash is about knowing that place that's holy for you and connected. Although it's funny, I was wondering, did you think of Makom as well, or is Makom still too connected to God in Jewish? Because I was thinking Mikdash is about one particular place.
Yeah, although
it doesn't have to be.
Because Mikdash, as we heard in the song that Joel played, Mikdash can also be in my heart.
Right.
You know, so it can, and it's really interesting that you bring that up because I think, and I didn't write about this in the book, but Judaism actually has a wonderful model around that whole idea of place. I mean, it's, you know, in the ideal, it doesn't always work out that way in reality, but if you look at our origin story and the biblical history, that, you know, we do not claim that we were born from this land. We came up, that many people have this, you know, autochthonous, fancy word. You know, we came up from the land. We are part of the land, and that can be dangerous, because it's like, so then anybody else who comes in is a foreigner, and they're a foreign body, and we've got to like reject them. Judaism from the beginning saw ourselves as we came into the land. The land is our land, but only on condition. And we got the Torah in the desert, which is this kind of like no person's land by definition, and then we came in to this land. So we have this deep, so from Judaism point of view, there's this deep connection to the land of Israel, but there's also, from the very beginning, there is a sense of, but there's also diaspora. We're also outside the land. We are not the only, you know, the land is really important to us, and if we're not careful, you know, we could be exiled from the land. And so there is a sense that it doesn't have to be one or the other, all or nothing.
Well, that's a beautiful another application of the avoiding
Either
either
or.
because I think for a lot of people they feel, even like some of the Jewish farming communities that are emerging in the U.S., are they somehow being untrue to some Zionist vision because they're making roots and creating beautiful Jewish community here as opposed to in the land, and you've just kind of created a whole way of
no, that's the thing,
understanding.
because there's so many, it's not really just all set in stone. There's so many ways to do it and ways to think about it yeah.
All right. Well, so take us then through mitzvah and tipping points.
So so mitzvah is the third principle, and mitzvah I connect to tipping points. So a mitzvah is it's often known as a good deed. It's a commandment. It's a small action. It's a discrete action that one takes because it's commanded, because it's for a higher purpose. Now that can change the world. It can change everything, but you don't know. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. And there are a lot of the stories, a couple of stories that that I tell in the book about why, it's like you can do something and you do it because you feel it's the right thing. And I quote Václav Havel, who the Czech dissident who then became president, who writes beautifully about that, about just like being in prison and having hope. And he's saying, like, hope is not like a sense that, like, oh, I'm optimistic, everything's going to be all right. It's really, what he says is that hope is the sense that I can't make any other choice than doing the right thing. I know I have to do this, and I hope it will come out right. And so we find that as well, that you do the right thing, and you do it for the purpose of being in alignment with your conscience, with God. And sometimes that can make a huge difference. And that's the same principle that we find in any complex system. Like, and so, you have that, the butterfly in China analogy. There's like a butterfly flaps its wings in China and it causes a hurricane in Kansas, which is this basic idea of chaos theory, that like a small action can have a huge effect. And we see that in climate change. We see that like a little thing, you get a temperature rise that's going to like uncover the permafrost, and it lets out all this methane, and all of a sudden you have like a runaway chain reaction that like a tiny little change created a huge shift. And that can happen, that happens in the natural. It can happen on the good side as well. Somebody can send a tweet, somebody can send an email, and it can go viral. This is one of the things, because so Malcolm Gladwell, wonderful popular writer, has now I can say with confidence, I can say tipping point and going viral, and everybody will know what I mean. And that's a change, because that's not a linear concept. That's a concept that says like a small action can have a huge effect. So that to me is a hopeful sign that we are getting in our popular culture. We're starting to like come around to like some of these ideas that are really systems thinking ideas that says like, yeah, you can do something. I can be composting in my backyard, and if I post that on Twitter and Facebook and everything else, then thousands of people could, well, maybe not, maybe hundreds of people, for me, thousands of people could see what I'm doing and could write my little essay about composting and be influenced by this little action that I do. So if you're asking, like, what difference does it make? I'm composting, it's a little tiny thing. Well, we are actually in a place where we can do a small thing, and it really can actually get out to the world. So that's another way that it's like these natural concepts, these systems concepts that are out there, they're also Jewish concepts. And that's what I would love to see in this book, for people to be able to start to use that as like, oh, that's a minyan kind of idea. That's a minyan, that's emergence.
That makes me think of the experience I had actually now a couple of years ago at the Greta Thunberg-inspired marches. There was a number of us from TBZ went down to the Common when there was the school strike for climate, the climate march. I remember going down there and being struck, kind of going back to my own story of being 16 years old and feeling I was the only one in the world who knew about this thing, of how many people there were now, young people, passionate, smart young people who were organizing together, and thinking about just Greta herself, who went on, wouldn't go to school for, months on end, and what she inspired in terms of a global movement, how many young people in the world are demanding change, and how that's cascading out in different ways. I think that's a beautiful manifestation of what you're talking about in the world today, of small actions leading to bigger actions, leading to really big changes, potentially.
Exactly, yeah, no, Nadav and I were there. And that was, I mean, it is because it's so easy to get discouraged and to really feel like, what can anything I do? But it's like you get those examples and you see that, like, a small action, one person or a small group of people really can make a huge difference. And there's ways that happens all the time. It's not the exception, it's the rule.
Yeah, well, now you see major corporations who are all focused on the impact of climate. It's a real change that I think the young people help spark. It's for real, and in DC as well. So.
Right, no, and you talk about like corporations, because that's another, just going back to minyan, the whole idea of minyan is this idea that it's like, we are all part of the system. Like, and you do much more talking to people in corporations and things like this, but it's like getting people to understand that like your success and your profits like ultimately are going to be more profitable when you see yourself as part of this whole system. Not when you like go, it's like that fishery example. Not when you go out quickly to get as many fish as you can, but when you see like, oh, you know what, like it's actually going to help me in the middle run, if not the short run, to actually take into account that we're all in this together and we're all interacting in all this as part of a system. I will actually be more successful. So those are the kind of cultural changes where we can get this minyan way of thinking into our environmental, our social, our political thinking.
Beautiful. Well, I think we want to let people ask questions, but we're going to have Joel do one more.
Okay, so let's turn to Joel for
a
song. So so we'll take some questions, and Joel, you can think of questions while he's playing.
So Natan, this is a tune about what you mentioned, that sense of nestedness and being in a kahal, being in a congregation, and being a part of a people, and being part of the world. שלום עלינו, עלינו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו, עלינו, על כל הקהל ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל. Sing it if you can sing it. כל יושבי תבל, 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 כל יושבי על כל הקהל ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל. הוא יעשה שלום עלינו, עלינו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו, עלינו, על כל הקהל ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל, על כל הקהל ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל.
Thank you, Joel.
Joel.
Thank you, Joel.
All right.
Okay.
So we open it up to all of you, or maybe also Zoom people.
Wait, so I think,
The mic.
does this work? This work? Okay. Okay.
To speak to the mic so that people at home can.
Okay.
So that was very optimistic. That's what I came away with. I think the message you send that as individuals and community, we can really solve these problems. The one thing I didn't hear you say at all was government. Where do you see the role of government in all this in solving these huge community problems that we have?
So, I mean, they're all mixed together. I mean, just one thing that comes to mind is like, you know, government can set the, as it was like, the playing field, can set incentives. So, you know, like, you think of like the Farm Bill, you know, the Farm Bill which comes up, and it can say, you know, we're gonna give subsidies. We can give subsidies like we do now to monocrops and, you know, to corn and soy, and that's, you know, or we can give subsidies to, you know, a variety of other crops. We can give subsidies for, you know, for rotating and doing things, you know, so, and which we're starting, which I think, you know, in this administration is starting to do something along those lines. So, and there's so many ways of setting up, it's almost like setting up the structures of society. Can we set up structures of society so that people are actually encouraged to work together, encouraged to come together in, you know, in family, in community, in units, and all sorts of ways. Politically, can we, you know, the way we set up, I mean, I'm not, you know, it's like, I'm just kind of like thinking of it because, like, it's not something that's like on the top of my head, but that basic idea that politically, socially, the government kind of on some level sets the ground rules. And that is super important, because we can talk all we want, but if the ground rules are all favoring individual profits quick this quarter, then that's where people are going to be drawn. If you set up incentives another way, then we'll come together. It's like, we have so many problems, for example, with social media. And social media is a huge issue in terms of tearing people apart and fragmenting and putting people into like opposing radical camps. Legislation can change some of the ground rules of how that works and shift, like you've got to use this algorithm, or you've got to tell us which algorithm you're using. Legislation like that could have a huge shift in how our society is working. So there's a ton of things that come up through government that can be done, if that answers.
Can I add?
Oh, thank you.
I know it's just taking your own systems framework. The government has a huge role to play, but it needs to be shown, like legislators need to be shown what's possible and need to be forced into doing the right thing. So it's part of a dynamic system, right? So I go back to the Sunrise Movement, I go back to all the people who were with Dayenu protesting, I go back to all the people who've been innovating and showing what's possible at local communities and at larger possibilities. And we now had our government passed the most consequential climate legislation in the history, maybe of the world, certainly of our country, just a few months ago. But that's not enough in and of itself, right? And governments change. And so it needs to come up from the grassroots, it needs to come from every level. Government plays an obvious, plays a massive role in terms of capital, in terms of policy, but it's part of a system.
Exactly, yeah. Exactly, and as I quoted Michael Pollan in the book, like that the government won't change if we don't change. He said a lot of these problems are problems of character. And so like if we are doing things and changing our lives and changing the kind of things we buy and the kind of things we say and the people that we vote for, then people will start to listen. The government will start to listen and the corporations will start to listen. But we can't sort of expect them to do it for us and without us changing as well. So, yeah. So I think you were, Moshe, you were first, I think.
You have one at Zoom? Why don't we do the one on Zoom and then...
Okay.
Oops, oh, here it is. So, Beverly Sky said with regards to carved on Buckminster Fuller's gravestone in Mount Auburn Cemetery, quote, "Call me trim tab." A trim tab is a metaphor for leadership from behind, and it's the small device at the back of a large ship or plane that controls or stabilizes the direction of the vehicle. This is a wonderful conversation. Thank you. And Chris has a question. Natan, what pointers might you offer us about specific ways to put the 3 M's into practice in our daily lives, very related to what we were just talking about, as we try to live ecologically and respond to the climate crisis?
Thank you. So, that is the question. So like for Minyan, how can we first of all help to like avoid in our own lives that sense of disconnectedness, because none of us is completely like immune from that. How can we, so like if you're not a member of a wonderful community like this, join TBZ. That's become part of a community that really nourishes you is, I would say, the first step. But then also things that are going to like bring you into a sense of your own local community, walk around your neighborhood, ride a bike, do those kinds of things that are like, will just in your personal life get you to be connected to your local community. But also, how can we see things? How can we start to see that things are connected and look in terms of this whole system? So for example, I talk in the book a little bit about gun violence and the way that there's a tendency, and Jed, I quote you here in that part of the book, there's a tendency for people to look at it as like, oh my gosh, if somebody was there with a gun, then they would have been able to like stop that mass, it's like, but in fact, it's an individual way of looking at it. It's like in this particular thing, when we look at the whole and the whole system says that the more guns, the more violence. And so it's a shift of how can we look at the whole system, even just understanding what a threat climate change is. When we look at like, okay, but what's this individual problem? It's like, no, we have to understand how can we look at this whole system. We have corporations that are saying, oh, look, climate change, like the ice caps are melting in the Arctic. Let's go drill some more oil up there now that we can get our ships through. So that kind of thinking, where can we catch ourselves when we find ourselves pulled to that kind of thinking? And then even just in terms of like our communities, one of the things that I think is like, can we start to see ourselves as connected to the whole? Because it's very easy, and I know it's like it's very easy in our present political environment to say it's all those evil people, stupid evil people over there, and we who are right are all good, and if only they would get it right. Where in fact we have to actually see that we are all part, and we are all part of a large system. So we actually have to talk to people who we don't agree with. And that's maybe one of the things that comes out is like it's actually healthy for us to get out of a little bubble, because we are being affected by the whole system, and we are finding ourselves more and more in a little bubble that doesn't know how to talk to people outside our bubble. That's, on some level, it feels like that's our choice, but in fact, that's us being affected by the whole system, which is fragmenting and polarizing. So the more we can actually understand, we are all part of a system, and we actually have to like counteract that tendency to only talk to people I like, agree with me, and talk to people who we disagree with. That's another consequence, I think, of a minion way of thinking. So just a few thoughts.
So I want to take this in a different direction. I want to ask you a more personal question. It sounds like some of the stories or some of the ideas in the book, started when you were a kid. And I want to ask you about this process of going from a bunch of disconnected ideas that accumulated over time and how it coalesced into the frameworks that you came up with in the book, and the process of writing the book and where it got challenging or difficult.
There was no challenge. That was fun. That's interesting. I do talk a little bit in the book about some of the just like influences and people who caught my ear or caught my eye along the way. So I always had that sense of looking for intellectually things that like caught my eye because they seem to have an integrative point of view. So somewhere early college, I started to read Gregory Bateson. And Gregory Bateson was one of the early systems thinkers, and they didn't even have the name system. He talked about like cybernetics and was integrating. He talked about mind. He had a wonderful book called Mind in Nature, where you talk about nature has mind. And that was this was back in 1970 something. And so I started to gravitate towards the kind of ideas that fit my way of thinking, but also my yearning for integration. And then I talk about a whole journey in the book, because when I discovered Judaism, but it was more that specifically, I had a wonderful teacher at Pardes, Dov Berkovitz, who was teaching Mishnah in a way that nobody else, I was lucky enough, nobody else was teaching it like this. Because he was teaching it not as one law and another law and another law and another law, and let's analyze this law and take 5 pages and then we're going to come back to the next one. It was let's look at this chapter and all of these laws as a composition, as a unit. And let's look at not just individually, but let's look at this text as working together in relationship, in a literary kind of relationship. And all of a sudden the text was coming alive. And so at a certain point, I really got excited about Jewish texts, because I saw this was a kind of thinking that I had kind of seen a little bit in Gregory Bateson. And I started to see that this is a kind of thinking that puts things together. And it feels flowing, and it feels more like art than science on some level for me. And then I started to read other people and put that together with ecological thinking in different ways. So it was a process, but I was always I was always pulling for knowing that I kind of thought differently, and I'm trying to find ways that can work in the world to who else is thinking like this. So thank you for that. I get to talk about my life. Aiden. Uh-oh. I don't know. Aiden, ask a responsible question.
Anarchy, what are your thoughts? No. So when someone sees like your thinking as like a Jewish like way of thinking, like how do you, most people aren't Jewish, it's like 1% of the world, so how do you get past that? Because it seems like you want to kind of like have, like everyone have this like community way of thinking. So how do you get past it just being a Jewish thing?
Thank you, Aiden. Yeah, so, thank you. No, so the cool thing is that this is a way of thinking, this sort of systems, ecological way of thinking that I think is catching on in a lot of places. It's catching on in many sciences. It's catching on in social science, economics, psychology, public health. And it's catching on in a lot of ways. And so I'm interested in bringing the Jewish community along to say, we can be part and we can contribute to that trend, but we don't have to be the only ones. And we might like inspire or get into dialogue with other people. And one of the things that I've found in terms of like what I've been able to learn from indigenous communities is that some of the things that I'm saying about Jewish ways of thinking are very similar to what I'm learning about indigenous ways of thinking. And so when you go back, somebody like Joanna Macy, for example, is a Buddhist scholar and climate activist, an environmental activist. And she wrote a book a number of years ago, which was almost like the parallel to what I'm trying to do in Judaism about Buddhism. Because she was saying like a core of Buddhist thought is really the same as systems thinking. It's all about co-arising and things in interaction, that nothing is on its own, everything comes into being through relationship. Core Buddhist kinds of thinking. So what I see is that Judaism is one voice of a number of different voices that are now starting to emerge that are all kind of like going in this direction. So I don't need everybody to be Jewish, I just want Jewish to be one of the relevant voices.
That's maybe a perfect last question based on, do you want more songs?
Maybe.
Let's,
okay, we have one more question.
Okay.
Just maybe to tie things together, I was listening on Zoom to a talk with Al Gore at Stryker Center in New York.
Mm-hmm.
So that's Judaism coming together with the outside world. And he made a suggestion that all of us can gather in terms of our kids going to school. And it would be significant if schools were able to put solar panels on their roofs and change their buses from diesel to electric. And that's something you can come together as a community all over the country.
Right. Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And it really is, because it's like, these are the kind of things that one can make a change in local government, in your own school district. You can advocate for this. And as we've been slowly learning, you know, it's like local government, like you can, like one person showing up to a meeting can really make a big difference on that level. And you can advocate for you know, like school buses being electric. You can advocate for different kind of food systems. You can advocate for gardens, for you know, solar panels. There's so many things that you can do, and then that starts to grow from one local community to another. And then, so that's a great, that's a great, actually wonderful example of nestedness, because you can start with schools, you can start with communities, they can grow up into the city, into the state, into the country, and that's the way things change. So I just want to thank everybody for being here. Ilana, we're not done. So my wife Ilana has made some wonderful refreshments. There's refreshments in the back for those who are here in your physical beings, and I'll be in the back. I'll be able to sign books in the back as well. Buy books. And there's a link if you're on Zoom. There's a link where you can buy books through that link. And so I look forward to talking with you outside in the hall, and feel free to send me an email or be in touch. Thank you all for coming. It's been great here.
Before you go, Rabbi Ferret's going to say a word to close. She's just putting the link, and then she's doing 3 things at the same time.
And thank you to Rav Tiferet and Rav Claudia and TBZ for making this possible.
We're so
And thank you for
excited.
Joel and for Mark.
All right.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Just a word very quickly about why we chose this night for this event, because in our Torah it's Parshat Noach, and we talk so much about the boat, which is important, the ark, but there's also the story of Migdal Bavel, of the Tower of Babel, and it's just 9 short verses, and everyone wonders, like, what did the people do that was so evil that God caused them to spread out? And when we look at that story in context, it's exactly like you're saying in the book. God said, go out and be part of the world and, get to know the land and find your places and everything. And the people said, you know what? Let's just be concerned with ourselves. We'll make a tower here for us, and we'll just live here happily, and it'll just be about us and our little bubble, and we won't let anyone in or out, and that'll just be what it is. We're one language, we're one culture, we'll just be here. And that's what we just learned tonight. That's not what our mission is as humanity. As humans, our mission is to be a part of nature, to be connected to our earth, and to spread that message. So I hope you're able to take all of what you heard tonight, what you will read in the books that you will purchase shortly, and carry that message forward to be the trim tab. Each one of us gets to be that little trim tab into our communities beyond TBZ. So thank you so much for being here.